Aloha! What's up, everyone? I'm JayDreamerZ. Thanks for all those who are watching live right now. Thanks for being patient. I was late getting back to my house, so we're starting off a little bit late. But let's jump right into everything. First and foremost, thank all of you so much for your great support. I really appreciate it. I want to read this book to you. This is called The Smoky God. And the reason I want to preface this. This is not like an audio book or anything. I'm probably going to talk. I might do voices. I don't know. But yes, let me get set up here. There we go. All right, cool. So, I want to read this book. It's a short book. It's not too long. This is a true story. Let me give you the background real quick. This is a true story about a Norwegian fisherman who, when he was a young boy, went out on a fishing trip with his dad. His dad started talking to him about the Norse gods and how they lived, up closer to the North Pole. And the kid's like, well, what's stopping us from going? Why don't we just go up there? And the dad's like, well, you're right. Let's go. I mean, if you want to go, I'll go. So they go up to the North Pole together. And it's amazing, right? The book starts off. The little boy tells the little boy has grown up. He's now 95 years old, and he's an old man on his deathbed. I'm going to tell you a little bit of his backstory at first, too. The language used is late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's why I'm giving you this preface right now. Some of the language might be a little difficult to understand because we don't speak this way anymore, unfortunately. But so what happened is when this young boy got back from his 2-year-long adventure at the North Pole, or inside of the Earth, with his father, he relayed his story to many people. And guess what happened to him? He was locked up in a mental hospital in a crazy ward, arrested on, various times, and he was there for a long time. So he learned not to talk about this story. He almost took this story with him to his deathbed, but fortunately, he made friends with his next door neighbor, a younger kid who happened to be a reporter, who got to know Olaf Jansen, which is who the story is about, the young Norwegian boy. And Olaf invited him over to his place on a few occasions because he liked him, and he said, I want to share a story with you that may seem unbelievable. And the reporter is actually the guy who wrote the story. He's the one that wrote the story. And a lot of people pass this story off as saying like, oh, that's fiction, or that's not true. It's not a real story or whatever. I believe that it is. I'm not sure exactly what it's categorized as in the library or whatever, but sometimes I read stories and they hit home like they're true. I don't have the chat pulled up right now. That's why I'm not saying anything in the chat, because this is going to be a long video. I'm going to read an entire book to you guys. And I also want to respect everyone's time in the future. So, basically, this is the story of an old man who went through some crazy adventures as a kid. No one in the world believed him when he got back, and he wanted to leave the story with someone before he died. And this is going to be his story. The book is called The Smoky God, or A Voyage to the Inner World. Might as well just start right now, right? All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read this book, and if we need, we may take a couple of breaks along the way so you guys can use the bathroom and stuff like that. We'll see how it goes. But I'm going to try to get through the entire book in one sitting right now. The Smoky God, or A Voyage to the Inner World, Part 1. This is the author's foreword. This means this is the author's like, hey, before I write this book, I want to talk to you, the reader. Okay. All right. So here's the author. I fear the seemingly incredible story which I'm about to relate will be regarded as the result of distorted intellect, superinduced possibly by the glamour of unveiling such a marvelous mystery, rather than a truthful record of the unparalleled experiences related by one Olaf Jansen, whose eloquent madness so appealed to my imagination that all thought of an analytical criticism has been effectually dispelled. Let me break that down what that means real quick, okay? That means He's saying, I'm about to tell you a crazy story that somebody that I trust and respect told me. And it's hard to believe, but it was so convincing that I don't even question it. All right. He goes on. Marco Polo will doubtless shift unceasingly in his grave at the strange story that I'm called upon to chronicle, a story as strange as the Mancosan tale. It is also incongruous that I, a disbeliever, should be the one to edit the story of Olaf Jansen, whose name is now for the first time given to the world, yet who must hereafter rank as one of the notables of the earth. I freely confess his statements, and I admit no rational analysis, but have to do with the profound mystery concerning the frozen north, for that centuries has claimed the attention of scientists and laymen alike. However much they are at variance with the cosmographical manuscripts of the past, these plain statements may be relied upon as a record of the things that Olaf Jensen claims to have seen with his own eyes. 100 times I have asked myself whether it's possible that the world's geography is incomplete, and that the startling narrative of Olaf Jansen is predicated upon demonstrable facts. The reader may be able to answer these queries to his own satisfaction, however far the chronicle of this narrative may be from having reached a conviction. Yet sometimes, even I am at a loss to know whether I have been led away from an abstract truth by the ignis fauti of a clever superstition, or whether heretofore accepted facts are after all founded upon falsity. So what he's saying right now, and let me pull up the chat. I want to make sure that you guys can hear me. Yikes. Let me just double check. Can you guys hear me? I'm popping the chat out right now. So basically what he's saying in regular speak, right, layman's terms, he's saying this is an unbelievable story, and I can't believe I'm the one who is presenting it because I'm not a believer in stuff like this. However, it's so convincing because I know this guy, and it's so convincing by the way that he speaks to me. I'm compelled to share it with you, and you can make your own decision. Right on. Thanks everybody in the chat. Super appreciate it. All right, cool. Let's press on with the story. Now, it may be that the true home of Apollo was not at Delphi, but in that older Earth center of which Plato speaks, where he says, Apollo's real home is among the Hyperboreans, in a land of perpetual life, where mythology tells us 2 doves flying from 2 opposite ends of the earth met in this fair region, the home of Apollo. And indeed, according to Hecatus, Leto, the mother of Apollo, was born on an island in the Arctic Ocean, far beyond the north wind. It's not my intention to attempt a discussion of the theogony of the deities, nor the cosmology of the world. My simple duty is to enlighten the world concerning a heretofore unknown portion of the universe, as it was seen and described by the Old Norseman Olaf Jansen. Interest in northern research is international. 11 nations are engaged in or have contributed to the perilous work of trying to solve the Earth's one remaining cosmological mystery. There is a saying, ancient as the hills, that truth is stranger than fiction. And in a most startling manner has the axiom brought home to me within the last fortnight. It was just 2 o'clock in the morning when I was aroused from a restful sleep by the vigorous ringing of my doorbell. The untimely distributor proved to be a messenger bearing a note that was scrawled almost to the point of illegibility from an old Norseman by the name of Olaf Jansen. After much deciphering, I made out the writing, which simply said, "Am ill unto death. Come." The call was imperative. I lost no time in making ready to comply. Perhaps I may as well explain here that Olaf Jansen, a man who quite recently celebrated his 95th birthday, has for the last half-dozen years been living alone in an unpretentious bungalow in Glendale Way, a short distance from the business district of Los Angeles, California. It was less than 2 years ago. While walking out one afternoon, I was attracted by Olaf Jansen's house and its home-like surroundings towards its owner and occupant, whom I after came to know as a believer in the ancient worship of Odin and Thor. There was a gentleness in his face and a kindly expression in the keenly alert gray eyes of this man who had lived more than 80 years and 10, and withal a sense of loneliness that appealed to my sympathy. Slightly stooped, and with his hands clasped behind him, he walked back and forth with slow and measured tread that day that we first met. I can hardly say what particular motive impelled me to pause my walk and engage him in conversation. He seemed pleased when I complimented him on the attractiveness of his bungalow and on the well-tended vines and flowers clustering in profusion over its windows, roof, and wide piazza. I soon discovered that my new acquaintance was no ordinary person, but one profound and learned to a remarkable degree, a man who in later years of his long life had dug deeply into books and become strong in the power of meditative silence. I encouraged him to talk, and soon gathered that he resided only 6 or 7 years in Southern California, but had passed the dozen years prior in one of the Middle Eastern states. Before that, he had been a fisherman off the coast of Norway, in the region of the Lofoten Islands, where once he had made trips still further north to Spitsbergen and even to Franz Josef Land. When I started to take my leave, he seemed reluctant to have me go, and he asked me to come again. Although at the time I thought nothing of it, I remember now that he made a peculiar remark to me as I extended my hand in leave-taking. "You will come again," he said. "Yes, you will come again someday. I am sure you will. And I will show you my library and tell you many things of which you have never dreamed, things so wonderful it may be that you will not believe them." Laughingly, I assured him I would not only come again, but I would be ready to believe whatever he might choose to tell me of his travels and adventures. In the days that followed, I became well acquainted with Olaf Jansen, and little by little he told me his story, so marvelous that its very daring challenges reason and belief. The old Norseman always expressed himself with so much earnestness and sincerity that I became enthralled by his strange narrations. Then came the messenger's call that night, and within the hour I was at Olaf Jensen's bungalow. He was very impatient at the long wait, although after being summoned, I had come immediately to his bedside. "I must hasten," he exclaimed, while yet he held my hand in greeting. "I have much to tell you that you know not, and I will trust no one but you. I fully realize," he went on hurriedly, "that I will not survive the night. The time has come to join my fathers in the great sleep." I adjusted the pillows, and I tried to make him more comfortable. I assured him that I was glad to be able to serve him in any way possible, for I was beginning to realize the seriousness of his condition. The lateness of the hour, the stillness of the surroundings, the uncanny feeling of being alone with the dying man, together with this weird story, all combined to make my heart beat fast and loud, with a feeling for which I have no name. Indeed, there were many times that night by the old Norseman's couch, and there have been many times since, when a sensation rather than a conviction took possession of my very soul, and I seemed not only to believe in, but actually see the strange lands, the strange people, and the strange world of which he told, and to hear the mighty orchestral chorus of 1,000 lusty voices. For over 2 years he seemed endowed with almost superhuman strength, talking rapidly and to all appearances rationally. Finally he gave into my hands certain data, drawings, and crude maps. "These," he said in conclusion, "I leave in your hands. If I can have your promise to give them to the world, I shall die happy, because I desire my people know the truth. For then all mystery concerning the frozen Northland will be explained. There is no chance of your suffering the fate that I suffered. They will not put you in irons nor confine you to a madhouse, because you are not telling your own story, but mine. And I, thanks to the gods Odin and Thor, will be in my grave, and so beyond reach of disbelievers who would persecute. Without a thought of the far-reaching results of the promise entailed, or foreseeing the many sleepless nights which the obligation has since brought me, I gave my hand with its in pledge to discharge faithfully his dying wish. As the sun rose over the peaks of the San Jacinto, far to the eastward, the spirit of Olaf Jansen, the navigator, the explorer and worshipper of Odin and Thor, the man whose experiences and travels, as related, are without a parallel in all the world's history, passed away, and I was left alone with the dead. And now, after having paid the last sad rites to this strange man from the Lofoten Islands, and the still further northward Ho, the courageous explorer of frozen regions, who in his declining years, after he passed the 40 mark, had sought an asylum of restful peace in the sun-favored California, I will undertake to make public his story. But, first of all, let me indulge in one or two reflections. Generation follows generation, and traditions from the misty past are handed down from sire to son. But for some strange reason, interest in the ice-locked unknown does not abate with the receding years, either in the minds of the ignorant or the tutored. With each new generation, a restless impulse stirs the hearts of men to capture the veiled citadel of the Arctic, the circle of silence, the land of glaciers, cold wastes of waters and winds that are strangely warm. An increasing interest is manifested in the mountainous icebergs, and marvelous speculations are indulged in concerning the Earth's center of gravity, the cradle of the tides, where the whales have their nurseries, where the magnetic needle goes, where the magnetic needle goes mad, and where the aurora borealis illuminates the night, and where the brave and courageous spirits of every generation dare to venture and explore, defying the dangers of the farthest north. One of the available works of recent years is Paradise Found, or The Cradle of the Human Race at the North Pole by William F. Warren. In his carefully prepared volume, Mr. Warren almost stubbed his toe against the real truth, but missed it, seemingly, by only a hair's breadth if the Norseman's revelation is true. Dr. Orville Livingston Leach, scientist, in a recent article, says, "The possibilities of a land inside the Earth were first brought to my attention when I picked up a geode on the shores of the Great Lakes. The geode is a spherical and apparently solid stone, but when broken is found to be hollow and coated with crystals. The Earth is only a larger form of a geode, and the law that created the geode in its hollow form undoubtedly fashioned the Earth in the same way." In presenting the theme of this almost incredible story, as told by Olaf Jansen, and supplemented by manuscripts, maps, and crude drawings entrusted to me, a fitting indoctrination is found in the following quotation. "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. And also God created man in his own image. Therefore, even in the material, man must be godlike, because he is created in the likeness of the Father. A man builds a house for himself and family. The porches or verandas are all without and are secondary. The building is really constructed for the conveniences within. Olaf Jansen makes the startling announcement through me, a humble instrument, that in like manner God created the earth for within, that is to say, for its lands and seas and rivers and mountains, forests and valleys, and for other internal conveniences, while the outside surface of the earth is merely a veranda, the porch, where things grow by comparison but sparsely, like the lichen on the mountainside, clinging determinedly for bare existence. Take an eggshell, and from each end, break out the piece as large as the end of this pencil. Extract its contents, and then you'll have a perfect representation of Olaf Jansen's Earth. The distance from the inside surface to the outside surface, according to him, is about 300 miles. The center of gravity is not in the center of the Earth, but in the center of the shell, or the crust. Therefore, if the thickness of the Earth's crust or shell is 300 miles, the center of gravity is 150 miles below the surface. In their logbooks, Arctic explorers tell us of the dipping of the needle as the vessel sails in regions of the farthest north known. In reality, they are at the curve, on the edge of the shell, where gravity is geometrically increased. And while electric currents seemingly dash off into space towards the phantom idea of the North Pole, yet this same electric current drops again and continues its course southward along the inside surface of the Earth's crust. In the appendix to his work, Captain Sabine gives an account of experiments to determine the acceleration of the pendulum in different latitudes. This appears to have resulted in the joint labor of Peary and Sabine. He says that the accidental discovery that a pendulum, on being removed from Paris to the neighborhood of the equator, increased its time of vibration, gave the first step to our present knowledge that the polar axis of the globe is less than the equatorial, that the force of gravity at the surface of the Earth increases progressively from the equator towards the poles. According to Olaf Jansen, in the beginning, this old world of ours was created solely for the within world, where are located the four great rivers, the Euphrates, the Pishon, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel. These same names of rivers, when applied to the streams on the outside surface of the earth, are purely traditional from an antiquity beyond the memory of man. On the top of a high mountain, near the fountainhead of four rivers, Olaf Jansen, the Norseman, claims to have discovered long-lost Garden of Eden, the veritable navel of the earth, and to have spent over 2 years studying and reconnoitering in this marvelous within land, exuberant with stupendous plant life and abounding in giant animals, a land where people live to be centuries old, after the order of Methuselah and the biblical characters, a region where 1/4 of the inner surface is water and 3/4 land, where there are large oceans and many rivers and lakes, where the cities are superlative in construction and magnificence, where modes of transportation are as far in advance of ours as we are, where modes of transportation are as far in advance of ours as we, with our boasted achievements, are in advance of the inhabitants of darkest Africa. The distance directly across the space from inner surface to inner surface is about 600 miles less than the recognized diameter of the Earth. In the identical center of this vast vacuum is the seat of electricity, a mammoth ball of dull red fire, not staringly brilliant, but surrounded by a white, mild, luminous cloud, giving out uniform warmth and held in its place in the center of this internal space by the immutable law of gravitation. This electrical cloud is known to the people within as the abode of the Smoky God. They believe it to be the throne of the Most High. Olaf Jansen reminded me of how in the old college days we were all familiar with the laboratory demonstrations of centrifugal motion, which clearly proved that if the Earth were a solid, The rapidity of its revolution upon its axis would tear it into 1,000 fragments. The Old Norsemen also maintained that from the farthest points of land on the islands of Spitzbergen and the Franz Josef Land, flocks of geese may be seen annually flying still further northward, just as the sailors and explorers recorded in their logbooks. No scientist has yet been audacious enough to attempt to explain, even to his own satisfaction, towards what land these winged fowls are guided by their subtle instinct. However, Olaf Jansen has given us a more reasonable explanation. The presence of the open sea in the Northland is also explained. Olaf Jansen claims that the northern aperture, intake or hole, so to speak, is about 1,400 miles across. In connection to this, let us read what explorer Nansen writes in page 288 of his book. He says, "I have never had such a splendid sail. On to the north, steadily north, with a good wind, as fast as the steam and sail can take us, an open sea mile after mile, watch after watch. Through these unknown regions, always clear and clearer of ice, one might almost say, how long will it last? The eye always turns to the northward as one paces the bridge. It is gazing into the future, but there is always the same dark sky ahead, which means open sea." Again, the Norwood Review of England, in its issue of May 10th, 1884, says, "We do not admit that there is ice up to the North Pole. Once inside the great ice barrier, a new world breaks upon the explorer. The climate is mild like that of England, and afterward balmy as the Greek Isles. Some of the rivers within, Olaf Jansen claims, are larger than our Mississippi and Amazon rivers combined. In point of volume of water carried, indeed, their greatness is occasioned by their width and depth rather than their length. And it is at the mouths of these mighty rivers, as they flow northward and southward along the inside surface of the earth, that mammoth icebergs are found, some of them 15 and 20 miles wide, and from 40 to 100 miles in length. It is not strange that there has never been an iceberg encountered, either in the Arctic or the Antarctic Ocean, that is not composed of fresh water. Isn't that strange? Modern scientists claim that freezing eliminates the salt, but Olaf Jansen claims differently. Ancient Hindu, Japanese, and Chinese writings, as well as the hieroglyphics of the extinct races of the North American continent, all speak of a custom of sun worshipping, and it's possible, in the startling light of Olaf Jansen's revelations, that the people of the inner world, lured away by glimpses of the sun as it shone upon the inner surface of the earth, either from the northern or the southern opening, became dissatisfied with the Smoky god, the great pillar or the mother cloud of electricity, and weary of their continuously mild and pleasant atmosphere, followed the brighter light, and were finally led beyond the ice belt and scattered over the outer surface of the earth through Asia, Europe, North America, and later Africa, Australia, and South America. Excuse me. Then he inserts some stuff that's sort of in italics that's not really a part of the story, so I'll read that. The following quotation is significant. It follows that man issuing from a mother region still undetermined, but which a number of considerations indicate to have been in the north, has radiated in several directions, that his migrations have been constantly from north to south. So basically what they're saying is that the people originate from the north, and then they spread out as they expand and leave the north, and then they discover worlds increasingly south, or countries and stuff. He goes on to say, "It is a notable fact that as we approach the equator, the stature of the human race grows less. But the Patagonians of South America are probably the only aborigines from the center of the earth who came out through the aperture, usually designated as the South Pole. And they are called the giant race. Olaf Jansen avers that in the beginning the world was created by a great architect of the universe, so that man might dwell upon its inside surface, which has ever since been the habitation of the chosen. They who were driven out of the Garden of Eden brought their traditional history with them. The history of the people living within contains a narrative suggesting the story of Noah and the ark, with which we are familiar. He sailed away, as did Columbus, from a certain point to a strange land where he had heard of far to the northward, carrying him all manner of beasts of the field and fowls of the air, but was never heard after or afterwards. On the northern boundaries of Alaska, and still more frequently on the Siberian coast, are found boneyards containing tusks of ivory in quantities so great as to suggest the burying places of antiquity. From Olaf Jensen's account, they have come from a great prolific animal life that abounds in the fields and forests on the banks of the numerous rivers of the inner world. The materials were caught in the ocean's currents, or were carried on ice floats, and have accumulated like driftwood on the Siberian coast. This has been going on for ages, and hence these mysterious boneyards. On this subject, William F. Warren, in his book already cited, pages 297 and 298, he says, "The Arctic rocks tell of a lost Atlantis, more wonderful than Plato's. The fossil ivory beds of Siberia excel everything of the kind in this world. From the days of Pliny, at least, they have constantly been undergoing exploitation, and still they are the chief headquarters of supply. The remnants of mammoth are so abundant, as Greta says, the northern islands of Siberia seem built up of crowded bones." Another scientific writer, speaking of the islands of New Siberia, northward of the mouth of the river Lena, uses this language: "Large quantities of ivory are dug out of the ground every year." And indeed, some of the islands are believed to be nothing but an accumulation of drift timber and of bodies of mammoths and other antediluvian animals that are frozen together. From this, we may infer that during the years that have elapsed since the Russian conquest of Siberia, useful tusks from more than 20,000 mammoths have been collected. But now for the story of Olaf Jansen. I give it in detail, as set down by himself in manuscript and woven into the tale just as he placed them, are certain quotations from recent works on Arctic exploration, showing how carefully the Old Norseman compared with his own experiences those of the other voyagers to the frozen north. Thus wrote the disciple of Odin and Thor. All right, that's part one. So all of part one is the author, the reporter or whoever, explaining like, hey, this is not just some wild and crazy story. There's a lot of history to this. There's a lot of fact to this. And I'm just going to share what this guy says. And I'm seeing that it lines up with all of the facts, like with all of the history, with all of the myths and legends and all the strange anomalies about the Arctic. Hey, thank you, everyone. I can't respond to everyone donating and stuff, but I do want to say thank you because I want to continue on with the story. All right, part two, Olaf Jensen's story. My name is Olaf Jensen. I am a Norwegian, although I was born in the little seafaring Russian town of Uleaborg on the eastern coast of the Gulf of Bothnia, the northern arm of the Baltic Sea. My parents were on a fishing cruise in the Gulf of Bothnia and put into the Russian town of Uleaborg at the time of my birth, being the 27th day of October 1811. My father, Jens Jansen, was born at Rodwig on the Scandinavian coast, near to the Lofoten Islands, but after marrying, made his home at Stockholm, because my mother's people resided in that city. When 7 years old, I began going with my father on fishing trips along the Scandinavian coast. Early in life, I displayed an aptitude for books. At the age of 9 years, was placed at a private school in Stockholm, remaining there until I was 14. After this, I made regular trips with my father and his fishing voyages. My father was a man fully 6'3" in height and weighed over 15 stone. A typical Norseman of the most rugged sort, and capable of more endurance than any man I have ever known. He possessed the gentleness of a woman in tender little ways, yet his determination and willpower were beyond description. His will admitted no defeat. I was in my 19th year when we started on what proved to be our last trip as fishermen, and which resulted in this strange story that I shall be given to the world, not until I have finished my earthly pilgrimage. I dare not allow the facts, as I know them, to be published while I am living, for fear of the further humiliation, confinement, and suffering. First of all, I was put in irons by the captain of the whaling vessel which rescued me, for no other reason that I was told the truth about the marvelous discoveries made by my father and myself. But this was far from being the end of my tortures. After 4 years and 8 months' absence, I reached Stockholm only to find my mother had died the previous year, and the property left by my parents in the possession of my mother's people, but it was at once made over to me. All might have been well had I erased from my memory the story of our adventure and my father's terrible death. Finally, one day, I told the story in detail to my uncle, Gustav Osterlind, a man of considerable property, and I urged him to fit an expedition for me to make another voyage to the strange land. At first, I thought that perhaps he favored the project. He seemed interested and invited me to go before certain officials to explain to them, as I had, the story of our travels and our discovery. Imagine my disappointment and horror when, upon conclusion of my narrative, certain papers were signed by my uncle, and without warning, I found myself arrested and hurried away to dismal and fearful confinement in a madhouse, where I remained for 28 long, tedious, frightful years of suffering. I never ceased to assert my sanity and to protest against the injustice of my confinement. Finally, on the 17th of October, 1862, I was released. My uncle was dead, and the friends of my youth were now strangers. Indeed, a man over 50 years old, whose only known record is that of a madman, has no friends. I was at a loss to know what to do for a living, but instinctively I turned toward the harbor where fishing boats in great numbers were anchored, and within a week I had shipped with a fisherman by the name of Jan Hansen, who was starting on a long fishing cruise to the Lofoten Islands. Here my earlier years of training proved of the very greatest advantage, especially enabling me to make myself useful. This was but the beginning of other trips, and by frugal economy, I was in a few years able to find a fishing brig of my own. For 27 years thereafter, I followed the sea as a fisherman, 5 years working for others and the last 22 for myself. During all of the years, I was a most diligent student of books, as well as a hard worker at my business, but I took great care not to mention any one of the stories concerning the discoveries made by my father and myself. Even at this late day, I would be fearful of having anyone see or know the things that I am writing, and the records and the maps that I have in my keeping. When my days on earth are finished, I shall leave maps and records with enlightenment, and I hope they will benefit mankind. The memory of my long confinement with maniacs and all of the horrible anguish and sufferings are too vivid to warrant my taking further chances. In 1899, I sold out of my fishing boats. I found I had accumulated a fortune, sufficient to keep me for the remainder of my life. I then came to America. For a dozen years, my home was in Illinois, near Batavia, where I gathered most of my books in the present library, though I bought many of the choice volumes from Stockholm. Later, I came to Los Angeles, arriving here March 4th, 1901. The date I remember as it was McKinley's second inauguration day. I bought this humble home and determined here, in the privacy of my own abode, I would be sheltered by my own vine and fig tree, and with my books about me, to make maps and drawings of the new lands that we have discovered, and also to write the story detail from the time that my father and I left Stockholm until the tragic event that parted us in the Antarctic Ocean. I well remember that we left Stockholm in our fishing sloop on the 3rd day of April, 1829, and we sailed southward, leaving Gotham Island to the left and Oiland Island to the right. A few days later, we succeeded in doubling Sandhammer Point, and we made our way through the sound which separates Denmark from the Scandinavian coast. In due time, we put in at the town of Kristiansand, where we rested 2 days, and then started around to the Scandinavian coast to the westward bound of the Lofoten Islands. My father, he was in high spirit, because of the excellent and gratifying returns that we had received from our last catch by marketing at Stockholm instead of selling at one of the seafaring towns along the Scandinavian coast. He was especially pleased with the sale of some ivory tusks that he had found on the west coast of Franz Josef Land during the northern cruises the previous year, and he expressed hope that this time we might again be fortunate to load our little fishing sloop with ivory instead of cod or herring or mackerel or salmon. We put in at Hammerfest, latitude 71 degrees and 49 minutes for a few days' rest. Here we remained 1 week, laying in extra supply of provisions and several casks of drinking water, and then we sailed towards Spitsbergen. For the first few days, we had an open sea and a favoring wind, and then we encountered much ice and many icebergs. A vessel larger than our little fishing sloop could not possibly have threaded its way among the labyrinth of icebergs or squeezed through the barely open channels. These monster bergs... I realize... let me time out. I realize my accent is slowly switching from Russian to, Irish for some reason. I don't know. I'm just going to go with it. Every time in my head, I keep going, I will break you, from Rocky. These monster bergs presented an endless succession of crystal palaces and massive cathedrals, fantastic mountain ranges, and grim and sentinel-like, immovable as some towering cliff of rock, standing silent as a sphinx, resting in the restless waves of a fretful sea. That just sounds Irish to me. After many narrow escapes, we arrived at Spitsbergen on the 23rd of June and anchored at the Wijad Bay for a short time, where we were quite successful in our catches. We then lifted anchor and sailed through the Hinlopen Strait and coasted along through the north-east land. A strong wind came up from the southwest, and my father said we had better take advantage of it and try to reach Franz Josef Land, where the year before he had by accident found the ivory tusks that had brought him such a good price in Stockholm. Never before or since have I have I seen so many seafowl. There were so numerous that they hid on the rocks of the coast and they darkened the sky. For several days, we sailed along the rocky coast of Franz Josef Land. Finally, a favoring wind came up that enabled us to make the west coast, and after sailing 24 hours, we came to a beautiful inlet. One could hardly believe that we were that far northland. The place was green and it was growing with vegetation. And while the area did not comprise more than 1 or 2 acres, yet the air was warm and tranquil. It seemed to be at that point where the Gulf Stream's influence is most keenly felt. On the east coast there were numerous icebergs, yet here we were in the open water, far to the west of us. However, they were ice packs, and still further there, to the westward, the ice appeared more like ranges of low hills. In front of us and directly to the north lay an open sea, and my father was an ardent believer in Odin and Thor, and had frequently told me that they were gods who came from far beyond the north wind. There was a tradition. My father explained that still further northward there was a land, more beautiful than that of mortal man has ever known, and that it was inhabited by what he calls the chosen. My youthful imagination was fired by the ardor and the zeal and religious fervor that my good father had, and I exclaimed, "Why not sail to this goodly land? The sky is fair, the wind is favorable, and the sea is open." Even now I can see the expression of pleasurable surprise on his countenance as he turned toward me and I asked, "My son, are you willing to go with me to explore, to go far beyond where man has ever ventured?" I answered affirmatively. "Very well," he replied. "May the god Odin protect us," and quickly adjusting the sails, he glanced at our compass, turned the prow in due northerly direction, through an open channel, and began our voyage. The sun was low on the horizon, as it was still the early summer. Indeed, we had almost 4 months of day ahead of us before the frozen night could come again. Our little fishing sloop sprang forward, as if eager for us to go on adventure. Within 36 hours, we were out of sight of the highest point of the coastline of Franz Josef Land. We seemed to be in a strong current, running north by northeast. Far to the right and to the left, there were icebergs, but our little sloop bore down on the narrows and passed through channels and out into the open seas. Channels so narrow that in places they had our craft not been as small, we never would have gotten through. On the 3rd day, we came to an island. Its shores were washed by an open sea. My father determined to land and explore for a day. This new land was destitute of timber, but we found a large accumulation of driftwood on the northern shores. Some of the trunks of the trees were 40 feet long and 2 feet in diameter. After 1 day's exploration of the coastline of this island, we lifted anchor and we turned the prow toward the north in the open sea. I remember that neither my father nor myself had tasted food for almost 30 hours. Perhaps this was because the tension of the excitement of our strange voyage in waters farther north, my father said, than anyone had ever been. Active mentality had dulled the demands of the physical needs. Instead of the cold being intense as we had anticipated, it was really warmer and more pleasant than it had been in the Hammerfest on the north coast of Norway some 6 weeks before. We both frankly admitted that we were very hungry, and forthwith I prepared a substantial meal from our well-stored larder. When we had partaken heartily of the repast, I told my father I believed that I would go to sleep, as I was beginning to feel quite drowsy. "Very well," he would reply. I will keep watch. I have no way to determine how long I slept. I only know that I was rudely awakened by a terrible commotion of the sloop, and to my surprise, I found my father sleeping soundly. I cried out lustily to him and started up. He sprang quickly to his feet. Indeed, he had not instantly clutched the rail. He would have certainly been thrown into the seething waves. A fierce snowstorm was raging, the wind directly astern, driving our sloop at a terrible speed, and was threatening every moment to capsize us. There was no time to lose. The sails had to be lowered immediately. Our boat was writhing in convulsions. A few icebergs we knew were on either side of us, but unfortunately the channel was open directly to the north. But would it remain so? In front of us, girding the horizon from the left to the right, was a vaporish fog, or a mist, black as Egyptian night as the water's edge, and white like a stream cloud toward the top, which was finally lost to view as it blended with the great white flakes of falling snow. So let me time out real quick because I feel like my accent is terrible right now. Anyways, so what he's saying is he went on the journey with his father, and this deep sleep fell over both of them. For some reason, they both got super tired. And when they woke up, the current had picked up. The actual ocean current was more like a river current now, and it was going super fast. And they went through all of this fog that blended in with the snow that they were experiencing. All right, where were we? Whether it covered a treacherous iceberg or some other hidden obstacle against our little sloop, would dash and send us to a watery grave, or as merely as a phenomenon of an Arctic fog, there was no way to determine. By what miracle we escaped being dashed to utter destruction, I do not know. I remember our little craft creaked and groaned as if its joints were breaking. A rock and staggered to and fro, it clutched by some fierce undertow of whirlpool or maelstrom. Fortunately, our compass had been fastened with long screws to a crossbeam. Most of our provisions, however, were tumbled out and swept away in the deck of the Cody. And had we not taken the precaution at the very beginning to tie ourselves firmly to the masts of the sloop, we would have been swept into the lashing sea. Above the deafening tumult of the raging waves, I heard my father's voice. "Be courageous, my son," he shouted. "Odin is the god of the waters, the companion of the brave, and he is with us. Fear not." To me, it seemed there was no possibility of our escaping a horrible death. The little sloop was sheeping water. The snow was falling so fast as to be blinding, and the waves were tumbling over counters in reckless white-sprayed fury. There was no telling what instant we would be dashed against one of the ice pack. The tremendous swells would heave us up to the very peaks of mountainous waves, then plunge us, and then they would plunge us down into the depths of the sea's trough, as if our fishing sloop was a fragile shell. Gigantic white-capped waves, like veritable walls, fenced us in and kept us inside. This terrible nerve-wracking ordeal, with its nameless horrors of suspense and agony and fear undescribable, continued for more than 3 hours. And all the time we were being driven forward at fierce speed. Then suddenly, as if growing weary of its frantic exertion, the wind began to lessen its fury in degrees and to die down. At last we were in a perfect calm. The fog mist had disappeared, and before us lay an iceless channel, perhaps 10 or 15 miles wide, with a few icebergs far away to our right and an intermittent archipelago of smaller ones to the left. I watched my father closely, determined to remain silent until he spoke. Presently, he untied the rope from his waist, and without saying a word, he began working the pumps, which fortunately were not damaged, relieving the sloop of the water that it had encountered in the madness of the storm. He put up the sloop's sails as if calmly and casting the fishing net, and then remarked that we were ready for a favoring wind when it came. His courage and his presence were truly remarkable. On investigation, we found less than 1/3 of our provisions that were remaining. While to our utter dismay, we were covered that our water casks had been swept overboard during the violent plungings of our boat. 2 of our water casks were still in the hold, but they were empty. We had a fair supply of food, but no fresh water. I realized at once the awfulness of our position. Presently, I was seized with the consuming thirst. "It is indeed bad," remarked my father. "However, let us dry our bedraggled clothing, for we are soaked to the skin. Trust to the god Odin, my son. Do not give up hope." And the sun, it was beating down slantingly, as if we were in the southern latitude instead of the far northland. It was swinging around, its orbit ever visible, and rising higher and higher each day. Frequently mist-covered, yet always peering through the lacework of clouds for some fretful eye of fate, guarding the mysterious Northland jealously, and watching for the pranks of man. Far to our right, the rays decking the prisms of icebergs were gorgeous. The reflections emitted flashes of garnet, of diamond, sapphire, a pyrotechnic panorama of countless colors and shapes, while below could be seen in the green-tinted sea and above the purple sky. Part 3. We're on part 3. What do you guys think so far? Should I keep up the accent or just drop that? Are you guys having a good time? I hope so. All right, so let's recap. Basically, we've got this guy who's telling us, hey, I'm going to tell you this crazy story that this old man that I super trust told me. The old man used to be a young boy. He went out with his father on a fishing cruise to go fishing together. And the father was telling him about the land at the North Pole. The boy is like, let's go. The father's like, are you serious? Because I'll go. Don't mess with me. If you want me to go, I'm going to go. You really want to go? Are you serious? You really want to go? And they went, right? Okay, cool. All right, good. Good to see you guys in the chat. Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break. That way you can go to the bathroom and whatnot, and we'll come back and we'll do a few more of these parts. There's 7 parts total. We're on part 3 right now. All right, we're going to take our first break, and we'll be back shortly.
Around the world men's thoughts will fly, quick as the twinkling of an eye, and waters shall great wonders do. How strange, and yet it shall come true. Beneath the water men shall walk, shall ride, shall sleep, shall even talk, and in the air men shall be seen in white and black and even green. For in those wondrous far-off days the women shall adopt a craze to dress like men in trousers wear, and to cut off their locks of hair. They'll ride astride with brazen brow as witches do. On broomsticks now there'll be a sign for all to see. Be sure that it will certain be. Then love shall die and marriage cease, and nations wane and babes decrease, as wives shall fondle cats and dogs, and men live much the same as hogs. Pictures alive with movements free, boats like fishes beneath the sea. When men like birds shall scour the sky, then half the world deep drenched in blood shall die. Then half the world deep drenched in blood shall die. For those who live this century through, in fear and trembling this shall do. Flee to the mountains and the dens, to bog and forest and wild fens. For storm will rage and oceans roar, when Gabriel stands on sea and shore. And as he blows his wondrous horn, old worlds die and new be born. Fiery dragon will cross the sky 6 times before this earth shall die. Mankind will tremble and frightened be, for the 6 heralds in this prophecy. For 7 days and 7 nights, man will watch this awesome sight. The tides will rise beyond their ken to bite away the shores, and then the mountains will begin to roar, and earthquakes split the plain to shore, and flooding waters rushing in will flood the lands with such a din that mankind cowers in muddy fen and snarls about his fellow men. And when the dragon's tail is gone, man forgets and smiles and carries on to apply himself. Too late, for mankind has earned deserved fate. His masked smile, his false grandeur will serve the gods their anger stir, and they will send the dragon back to light the sky. His tail will crack upon the earth and rend the earth, and man shall flee king, lord, and serf. And men will die of thirst before the oceans rise to mount the shore, and lands will crack and rend anew. You think it strange, it will come true. And in some far off distant land, some men, oh such a tiny band, will have to leave their solid mount and span the earth, those few to count. And those surviving this will then begin the human race again. But not on land already there, but on ocean beds stark, dry, and bare. Not every soul on earth will die as the dragon's tail goes sweeping by. Not every land on earth will sink, but these will wallow in stench and stink of rotting bodies of beast and man, of vegetation crisped on land. And those that live will ever fear the dragon's tail for many year. But time erases memory. You think it's strange, but it will be. And before the race is built anew, a silver serpent comes to view, and spew out men of like unknown to mingle with the earth, now grown cold from its heat. And these men can enlighten the minds of future man to intermingle and show them how to live and love, and thus endow the children with the second sight, a natural thing, so that they might grow graceful, humble, and when they do, the golden age will start anew.
Boom. Right on. Well, hey, welcome back from our break. I'm trying to read through this. Let's just keep on going. We're on part 3. I think there's 7 parts to this book. And so far, they're on their way to the mysterious island. They're on their way to the mysterious north, beyond the northern winds of the Arctic Circle. So here we go. Part 3. Beyond the north wind. I tried to forget my thirst by busying myself with bringing up some food and emptying vessel from the hold. Reaching over the side rail, I filled the vessel with water for the purpose of laying my hands to my face, but to my astonishment, when the water came in contact with my lips, I could taste no salt. "Father," I fairly gasped, the water is fresh." "What, Olaf?" My father, glancing hastily around, "Surely you are mistaken. There's no land. You're going mad." "But taste it," I cried. And thus we made the discovery that the water was indeed fresh, absolutely so, without the least briny taste of even the suspicion of a salty flavor. We forthwith filled our 2 remaining water casks, and my father declared that it was a heavenly dispensation of mercy from the gods Odin and Thor. We were almost beside ourselves with joy, but hunger bade us to end our enforced fast. Now that we had found fresh water in the open sea, what might we not expect in this strange latitude where the ship had never before sailed and the splash of an oar had never been heard? We had scarcely appeased our hunger when a breeze began filling the sails again, and glancing at the compass, we found the northern point pressing hard against the glass. In response to my surprise, my father said, "I have heard of this before." It is what they call the dipping of the needle. We loosened the compass and turned it at right angles to the surface of the sea before its point would free itself from the glass and point according to the unmolested attraction. It shifted uneasily and seemed unsteady as a drunken man, but finally pointed the course. Before this, we thought that the wind was carrying us north by northwest, but with the needle free, we discovered that if it could be relied upon, that we were sailing slightly north by northeast. Our course, however, was ever tending northward. The sea was serenely smooth, with hardly a choppy wave, and the wind brisk and exhilarating. The sun's rays, while striking us aslant, furnished tranquil warmth, and thus time wore on day after day, and we were found from the record of our logbook. We had been sailing 11 days since the storm in the open sea. By the strictest economy, our food was holding out fairly well, but beginning to run low. In the meantime, one of our casks of water had been exhausted, and my father said, "We will fill it again." But to our dismay, we found the water was now as salt as in the region of Lofoten Islands off the coast of Norway. This necessitated our being extremely careful of the remaining cask. I found myself wanting to sleep much of the time. Whether it was the effect of the exciting experience of sailing in unknown waters, or the relaxation from the awful excitement incident to our adventure in the storm at sea, or due to want of food, I could not say. I frequently lay down on the bunker of our little sloop, and I looked far into the blue dome of the sky. Notwithstanding the sun was shining far away in the east, I always saw a single star overhead. For several days, when I was looked for this star, it was already there directly above us. It was now, according to our reckoning, about the 1st of August. The sun was high in the heavens and was so bright that I could no longer see the one lone star that attracted my attention a few days earlier. One day, about this time, my father startled me. He was calling my attention to a novel sight in front of us, almost at the horizon. "It is a mock sun," exclaimed my father. "I have read of them. It is called a reflection or a mirage. It will soon pass away." But this dull red false sun, as we suppose it to be, did not pass away for several hours, and while we were unconscious of it emitting any rays of light, still there was no time thereafter when we could not sweep the horizon in front and locate the illumination of this so-called false sun during a period of at least 12 hours out of every 24. Clouds and mist would at times almost, but never entirely, hide its location. Gradually, it seemed to climb higher into the horizon of the uncertain purple sky as we advanced. It could hardly be said to resemble the sun, except in its circular shape, and when not obscured by clouds or ocean mist, it had a hazy red-bronze appearance, which would change to a white like a luminous cloud, as if reflecting some greater light beyond. Finally, we agreed in our discussion of this smoky furnace-colored sun that whatever the cause of the phenomenon, it was not a reflection of our sun, but a planet of some sort, a reality. One day, soon after this, I felt exceedingly drowsy, and I fell into a sound sleep. But it seemed that I was almost immediately aroused by my father's vigorous shaking of me. By the shoulder, he was shaking me by the shoulder, and he says, "Olaf, awaken, there is land in sight." I sprang to my feet, and oh, joy unspeakable! There, far in the distance, yet directly in our path, were lands jutting boldly out from the sea. The shoreline stretched far away to the right of us, as far as the eye could see, and along the sandy beach were waves breaking into choppy foam, receding and going forward again, ever chanting in monotonous thunder tones of the song of the deep. The banks were covered with trees and vegetation. I cannot express my feelings of exultation at this discovery. My father stood motionless with his hand on the tiller, looking straight ahead, pouring out his heart in thankful prayers and thanksgiving to the gods Odin and Thor. In the meantime, a net which we found in the stowage had been cast, and we caught a few fish that materially added to our dwindling stock of provisions. The compass which we had fastened back into its place, in fear of another storm, was still pointing due north, and moving on this pivot, just as it had in Stockholm. The dipping of the needle had ceased. What could this mean? Then, too, our many days of sailing had certainly carried us far past the North Pole, and yet the needle continued to point north. We were sorely perplexed, for surely our direction was now south. We sailed for 3 days along the shoreline, and then we came to the mouth of a fjord, or river, of immense size. It seemed more like a great bay, and to this we turned our fishing craft, the direction being slightly northeast of south. By the assistance of a fretful wind that came to our aid about 12 hours out of every 24, we continued to make our way. We made our way inland into what afterward proved to be a mighty river, and which we learned was called by the inhabitants Hidekel. We continued our journey for 10 days thereafter, and found we had unfortunately attained a distance inland where ocean tides no longer affected the water, which had become fresh. The discovery came none too soon, for our remaining cask of water was well nigh exhausted. We lost no time in replenishing our casks, and continued to sail farther up the river when the wind was favorable, along the banks of great forest miles in extent could be seen stretching away the shoreline. The trees were of enormous size. We landed after anchoring near a sandy beach and waded the shore, and were rewarded by finding a quantity of nuts that were palatable and satisfying to hunger, and a welcome change from the monotony of our stock of provisions. It was about the 1st of September, over 5 months we calculated, since our leaving. We took leave from Stockholm. Suddenly, we were frightened almost out of our wits, hearing in the distance the singing of people. Very soon thereafter, we discovered a huge ship, gliding down the river directly toward us. Those aboard were singing in one mighty chorus that, echoing from bank to bank, sounded like 1,000 voices, filling the whole universe with quivering melody. The accompaniment was played on stringed instruments, not like unlike our harps. It was a larger ship than any I have ever seen, and was differently constructed. At this particular time, our sloop was becalmed, and not far from the shore, the bank of the river, covered with mammoth trees, rose up several 100 feet in beautiful fashion. We seemed to be on the edge of some primeval forest that doubtless stretched far inland. The immense craft paused, and almost immediately a boat was lowered, and 6 men of gigantic stature rowed to our little fishing sloop. They spoke to us in a strange language. We knew from their manner. One moment. We knew from their manner that they were not unfriendly. They talked a great deal amongst themselves, and one of them laughed immoderately as though he was finding us a queer discovery that had been made. One of them spied on our compass, and it seemed to interest them more than any other part of our sloop. Finally, the leader motioned as if to ask us we were willing to leave our craft and go on to their ship. "What say you, my son?" asked my father. "They cannot do any more than kill us." "They seem to be kindly disposed," I replied. "Although what terrible giants! They must be the select six of the kingdom's crack regiment. Just look at their great size." "We may as well go willingly," he said, "than be taken by force." My father said this smiling, for they are certainly able to capture us. Thereupon he made known by signs that we were ready to accompany them. Within a few minutes we were on board of their ship, and half an hour later our little fishing craft had been lifted bodily out of the water by strange sort of hook and tackle and set on board as a curiosity. There were several hundred people on board this, to us, mammoth ship, which we discovered was called the Naz, meaning, as we afterward learned, pleasure, or to give a more proper interpretation, pleasure excursion ship. If my father and I were curiously observed by the ship's occupants, this strange race of giants offered us an equal amount of wonderment. There was not a single man aboard who would not have measured fully 12 feet height. They all wore full beards, not particularly long, but seemingly short-cropped. They had a mild and beautiful faces, exceedingly fair, with ruddy complexions. The hair and the beard of many were black, others sandy, and others were steel yellow. The captain, as we designated, the dignitary in command of the great vessel, was fully a head taller than all of his companions. The women averaged to about 10 to 11 feet in height. Their features were especially regular and refined, while the complexion was a most delicate tint, heightened by a healthful glow. Both the men and the women seemed to possess that particular case of manner which we deem a sign of good breeding, and notwithstanding their huge statures, there was nothing about them suggesting awkwardness, as I was a lad in only my 19th year. I was doubtless looked upon as a true Tom-Thumb. My father's 6'3" did not lift the top head above the waistline of these people. Each one seemed to vie with the others in extending courtesies and showing us kindness to us. All of them laughed heartily, I remember. Are we still live streaming? Just want to make sure. Hopefully. We early discovered that gold was one of the most common metals shown, and that it was used extensively in decoration. Strange as it may seem, neither my father nor myself felt the least bit of solitude for our safety. "We have come into our own," my father said to me. "This is the fulfillment of the tradition told to me by my father and my father's father, and still back for many generations of our race. This is assuredly the land beyond the north wind." We seemed to make such an impression on the party that we were given specially into the charge of one of the men, Jules Galdea, and his wife, for the purpose of being educated in their language. And we, on our part, we were just as eager to learn as they were to instruct. At the captain's command, the vessel was swung cleverly about and began retracing its course up the river. The machinery, while noiseless, was very powerful. The banks on the trees on either side seemed to just rush by. The ship's speed at times surpassed that of any railroad train on which I have ever ridden here in America. It was wonderful. In the meantime, we had lost sight of the sun's rays, but we found a radiance within, emanating from the dull red sun which had already attracted our attention, now giving out a white light seemingly from a cloud bank far away from us. It dispensed a greater light, I should say, than 2 full moons on the clearest night. In 12 hours, this cloud of whiteness would pass out of sight as if eclipsed, and the 12 hours following corresponded with our night. We early learned that these strange people were worshippers of this great cloud at night. It was the Smoky god of the inner world. The ship was equipped with a mode of illumination which I now presume was electricity, but neither my father nor myself were sufficiently skilled in mechanics to understand whence came the power to operate the ship, or to maintain the soft, beautiful lights that answered the same purpose of our present methods of lighting the streets of our cities and our houses and our businesses. It must be remembered the time of which I write was the autumn of 1829, and we of the outside surface of the earth, we knew nothing then to speak of electricity. The electrically surcharged condition of the air was a constant vitalizer. I never felt better in my life than during the 2 years with my father as I sojourned inside of the earth. To resume my narrative of events, the ship on which we were sailing came to a stop 2 days after we had been taken aboard. My father said, as nearly as he could judge, we were directly under Stockholm or London. The city we had reached was called Jehu, signifying a seaport town. The houses were large and beautifully constructed, and quite uniform in appearance, yet without sameness. The principal operation of the people appeared to be agriculture. The hillsides were covered in vineyards, while the valleys were devoted to the growing of grain. I never saw such a display of gold. It was everywhere. The door casings were inlaid with the tablets were veneered with sheetings of gold. Domes of the public buildings were of gold. It was used generously in the finishings of the great temples of music. Vegetation grew in lavish exuberance, and fruit of all kinds was possessed the most delicate flavor. Clusters of grapes, 4 and 5 feet in length. Each grape was as large as an orange, and apples larger than a man's head typified the wonderful growth of the things that existed inside of the earth. Great redwood trees of California would be considered mere underbrush compared with the giant forest trees extending for miles and miles in all directions. In many directions along the foothills of the mountains, vast herds of cattle were seen during the last days of our travel on the river. We heard much of a city called Eden, but we were kept at Jehu for an entire year. By the end of that time, we had learned to speak fairly well of the language of the strange race of these people. Our instructors, Jules Galdea and his wife, exhibited a patience that was truly commendable. One day, an envoy from the ruler at Eden came to see us, and for 2 whole days my father and myself were put through a series of surprising questions. They wished to know from whence we came and what sort of people dwelt without of the world, what god we worshipped, our religious beliefs, the mode of living in our strange land, and 1,000 other things. The compass which we had brought with us attracted special attention. My father and I commented between ourselves on the fact that the compass still pointed north, although we now knew that we had sailed over the edge of the Earth's aperture and we were far along southward on the inside surface of the Earth's crust, which according to my father's estimate and my own is about 300 miles in thickness from the inside to the outside of the surface. Relatively speaking, it is no thicker than an eggshell, so that there is almost as much surface on the inside as there is on the outside of the Earth. The great luminous cloud, or ball of dull red fire, fiery red, in the mornings and the evenings, during the day giving off a beautiful white light, the Smoky god is seemingly suspended in the center of the great vacuum within the Earth and held to its place by an immutable law of gravitation or a repellent atmospheric force, as the case may be. I refer to the known power that draws or repels with equal force in all directions. The base of this electrical cloud, or central luminary, the seat of the gods, is dark and non-transparent, save for the innumerable small openings, seemingly in the bottom of the great support, or altar of the deity upon which the Smoky god rests. And the lights shining through these many openings twinkle at night, all of their splendor, and seem to be as like stars, as natural as the stars that we have shining above in Stockholm, excepting that they are appearing larger. This Smoky god, therefore, with each daily revolution of the Earth, appears to come up in the east and go down in the west, the same as our sun on the external surface. In reality, the people within, they believe that the Smoky god is the throne of their Jehovah and is stationary. The effect of the night and the day, therefore, produced in the Earth's daily rotation. I have since discovered that the language of the people of the inner world is much like Sanskrit. After we had given an account of ourselves to the emissaries of the central seat of the government in the inner continent, and my father had, in his crude way, drawn some maps at the request of the outside surface of the Earth, showing the divisions of the land and the water, and giving the name of each of the continents, large lands, and the oceans, we were taken overland to the city of Eden in a conveyance that was different from anything we have ever had in the Europe or America. This vehicle, doubtless, some electrical contrivance. It was noiseless. It ran on a single iron rail in perfect balance. The trip was made at a very high rate of speed. We were carried up hills and down dales, across the valleys, and again along the sides of steep mountains, without any apparent attempt having been made to level the earth as we do for our railroad tracks. The car seats were huge, yet comfortable affairs, and very high above the floor of the car. On the top of each car were high-geared flywheels lying on their sides, which were so automatically adjusted that at the speed of the car, as the speed of the car increased, the high speed of these flywheels geometrically increased as well. Jules Galdea explained to us these revolting fan-like wheels on the top of the cars destroyed the atmospheric pressure, or what is generally understood by the term gravitation. With this force thus destroyed or rendered negative, the car is safe from falling to one side or to the other on the single track as if it were in a vacuum. The flywheels on their rapid revolutions, destroying effectually the so-called power of gravitation, or the force of the atmospheric pressure, or whatever potent influence it may be, that causes the unsupported things to fall downward towards the Earth's surface, or to the nearest point of resistance. The surprise of my father and myself was indescribable amid the regal, magnificence of a spacious hall. We were finally brought before the great high priest, ruler over all of the land. He was richly robed and much taller than those who were about him, and he could not have been less than 14 or 15 feet in height. The immense room which we were received in seemed finished in solid slabs of gold, thickly studded with jewels and amazing brilliancy. The city of Eden is located in what seems to be a beautiful valley, yet in fact, it is on the loftiest mountain plateau of the inner continent, several thousand feet higher than any portion of the surrounding country. It is the most beautiful place I have ever beheld in all of my travels. In this elevated garden, the manner of fruits and vines and shrubs and trees and the flowers, they grow in profusely. In this garden, 4 rivers have their source in a mighty artesian fountain. They divide and they flow in 4 directions. This place is called by the inhabitants the navel of the earth, or the beginning, the cradle of the human race. The names of the rivers are the Euphrates, the Pishon, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel. The unexpected awaited us in this palace of beauty. In the finding of our little fishing craft, it had been brought before the high priest in perfect shape, just as it had been taken from the waters that day when it was loaded on board of the other ship, and the people who discovered us on the river more than a year before this. We were given an audience over 2 hours with this great dignitary who seemed kindly disposed and very considerate. He showed himself eagerly interested, asking us numerous questions, and invariably regarding things about which his emissaries had failed to inquire. At the conclusion of the interview, he inquired our pleasure, asking us whether we wished to remain in this country or if we preferred to go back to what he calls the outer world, providing it were possible to make a successful return trip across the frozen barriers that encircle both of the northern and the southern openings of the earth. My father replied, "It would please me and my son to visit your country and to see your people, your colleagues and your palaces of music and art, your great fields and your wonderful forests of timber. And after we have had this pleasurable privilege, we should like to try to return to our home on the outside surface of the earth. This son is my only child, and my good wife will be weary waiting our return. I fear you can never return," replied the chief high priest, "because the way is a most hazardous one. However, you shall visit the different countries with Jules Galdea as your escort, and be accorded every courtesy and kindness. Whenever you are ready to attempt a return voyage, I assure you that your boat, which is here on exhibition, shall be put in the waters of the river Hiddekel at the north, and we will bid you Jehovah speed." And thus terminated our interview with the high priest and the ruler of the continent. Part 4. Woo, buddy. How you guys doing? I'm having a blast. My hope is that much of this is resonating with many of us, as it does with myself. Part 4. In the underworld. We learned that the males do not marry before they are from 75 to 100 years old, and that the age of which women enter wedlock is only a little less. and that both men and women frequently live to be from 6 to 800 years old, and in some instances, much older. During the following year, we visited many villages and towns, and prominent among them being the cities of Nigi, and Delphi, and Hakatea. My father was called upon no less than half a dozen times to go over the maps which he had made from the rough sketches which had originally given the divisions we gave to the divisions of land and the water on the outside surfaces of the earth, right? I remember hearing my father remark that the giant race of people in the land of the Smoky god, almost as accurate as the idea of the geography of the outside surface of the earth, as had the average college professor in Stockholm. He was learning much. In our travels, we came to a forest of gigantic trees near the city of Delphi. Had the Bible said that there was trees towering over 300 feet in height and more than 30 feet in diameter, growing in the Garden of Eden in Ingersolls, the Tom Paines and Voltaires would doubtless have pronounced the statement of myth. Yet this is the description of the California Sequoia gigantea. But these California giants pale into insignificance when compared with the forest Goliaths that are found within the continent, where abound mighty trees from 800 to 1,000 feet high, and from 100 to 120 feet in diameter, countless in numbers, and forming forests extending hundreds of miles back from the sea. The people are exceedingly musical, and they learned to a remarkable degree in their arts and their sciences, especially in geometry and astronomy. Their cities are equipped with vast palaces of music where not infrequently as many of 25,000 lusty voices of this giant race swell forth in mighty choruses of the most sublime symphonies. The children were not supposed to attend institutions of learning until they were 20 years old. Then their school life, it begins and continues for 30 years, 10 of which are uniformly devoted to both sexes and the studying of music. Their principal vocations are architecture, agriculture, horticulture, and the raising of vast herds of cattle, and the building of conveyances particular to that country for travel on the land and the water. By some device which I could not explain, they hold communion with one another between the most distant parts of their country on air currents. Old buildings are erected with a special regard to strength and durability, beauty and symmetry, and with a style of architecture vastly more attractive to the eye than any that I have ever observed elsewhere. About 3/4 of the inner surface of the earth is land, and about 1/4 is water. There are numerous rivers of tremendous size, some flowering in a northerly direction and others southerly. Some of these rivers are 30 miles in width, and it is of these vast waterways the extreme north and southern parts of the inside surface of the earth, in the regions low temperatures are experienced, that these fresh icebergs are formed. They are pushed out to the sea like huge tongues of ice by the abnormal fresh turbulent waters that twice every year sweeping everything before them. We saw innumerable of bird life, no larger than those encountered in the forests of Europe or America, and it was well known that During the last few years, whole species of birds have quit the earth. A writer in the recent article of this subject, he says, it is not possible that these disappearing bird species quit their habitation without and find an asylum in the within world. Is it not possible? Whether inland among the mountains or along the seashore, we found bird life is prolific. When they spread their great wings, some of the birds appear to measure 30 feet from tip to tip. They are a great variety and many colors. We were permitted to climb out onto the edge of a rock and examine the nest of eggs. There were 5 in the nest, each of which was at least 2 feet in length and 15 inches in diameter. We had been in the city of Hectea about a week. Professor Galdea took us to an inlet where we saw thousands of tortoises along the sandy shore. I hesitate to state the size of these great creatures. They were from 25 to 30 feet in length, from 15 to 20 feet wide, and fully 7 feet in height. When one of them projected its head in the appearance of some hideous sea monster, sometimes they would look like this. The strange conditions inside of the earth, are favorable not only for vast meadows of luxuriant grasses, forest of green trees, and the manner of vegetable life, but wonderful animal life as well. One day, we saw a great herd of elephants. There must have been 500 of these thunder-throated monsters with their restlessly waving trunks. They were tearing huge boughs from the trees and trampling smaller growth into dust like so much hazelbrush. When they would average over 100 feet in length and from 75 to 85 inches in height. 75 to 85 feet in height. It seemed as I gazed upon the wonderful herd of these giant elephants that I was again living in a public library in Stockholm, where I had spent much time studying the wonders of the Miocene age. I was filled with mute astonishment, and my father was speechless with awe. He held my arm with a protective grip, as if fearful harm would overtake us. We were 2 atoms in this great forest, and fortunately unobserved by the vast herd of elephants as they were drifting on and away, following a leader, as does a herd of sheep. They browsed from growing herbage, which they, now and again, they shook the firmament with their deep bellowing. There is a hazy mist that goes up from the land each evening, and it invariably rains every 24 hours. This great moisture and the invigorating electrical light and the warmth account perhaps for the luxuriant vegetation, while the highly charged electrical air and the evenness of the climatic conditions may have much to do with the gigantic growth and the longevity of the animal life. In places, the level valleys stretched away for many miles in every direction. The Smoky god, in its clear white light, looked calmly down. There was an intoxication in the electrically surcharged air that fanned the cheek as softly as a vanishing whisper. Nature chanted a lullaby in the faint murmur of the winds, whose breath was sweet with the fragrance of bud and blossom. After having spent considerably more than a year in visiting several of the many cities of the within world, and a great deal of intervening country, and more than 2 years had passed from the time that we had been picked up by the great excursion ship on the river, we decided to cast our fortunes once more upon the sea, and to endeavor to regain the outside of the surface of the earth. We made known our wishes, and they were reluctantly but promptly followed. Our hosts gave my father, at his request, various maps showing the entire inside surface of the earth, its cities, the oceans, the seas, the gulfs, and the bays. They also generously offered to give us all of the bags of gold nuggets, some of them as large as a goose egg, that we were willing to attempt to take with us in our little fishing boat. In due time, we returned to Jehu, at which place we spent 1 month in fixing up overhauling our little fishing sloop. After all was in readiness, the same ship, Naz, that originally discovered us, took us on board and sailed to the mouth of the river Hedekel. After our giant brothers had launched our little craft for us, they were most cordially regretful at parting and evidenced such solicitude for our safety. My father swore by the gods Odin and Thor that he would surely return again within a year or two and pay them another visit. And thus we bade them adieu. We made ready and we hoisted our sail, but there was little breeze. We were becalmed within an hour after our giant friends had left us and started on their return ship. The winds were constantly blowing south. That is, they were blowing from the northern opening of the earth toward that which we knew to be south, but which, according to our compasses' pointing finger, was directly north. For 3 days we tried to sail and to beat against the wind, but to no avail. Whereupon my father says, "My son, to return by the same route as we came is impossible this time of year. I wonder why we did not think of this before. We have been here almost 2.5 years, therefore, thus is the season when the sun is beginning to shine in the southern opening of the earth, the long cold night in the Spitzbergen country." "Well, what shall we do?" I inquired. "There is only one thing that we can do," my father replied, "and that is to go south." Accordingly, he turned the craft about and gave it full reef and started by the compass north, but in fact directly south. The wind was strong and we seemed to have struck a current that was running remarkably fast with the swiftness of the same direction. In just 40 days, we arrived at Adelphi, a city that we had visited in company with our guides Jules Galdea and his wife near the mouth of the Gihon River. Here we stopped for 2 days and we were most hospitably entertained by the same people who had welcomed us in our former visit. We laid in some additional provisions and then we again set sail, following the needle due north. On our outward trip, we came through a narrow channel which appeared to be separating a body of water between two considerable bodies of land. There was a beautiful beach to our right, and we decided to stop. Casting anchor, we waded the shore to rest up for a day before continuing outward to our hazardous undertaking. We built a fire and we threw on some sticks of dry driftwood. While my father was walking along the shore, I prepared a tempting repast from supplies that we had been provided. there was a mild luminous light, which my father says resulted from the sun shining in the southern aperture of the earth. That night we slept soundly, and we awakened the next day as refreshed as if we had been in our own beds in Stockholm. After breakfast, we started on an inland tour of discovery, but had not gone far when we sighted some birds which we recognized as once belonging to the penguin family. They were flightless birds, but excellent swimmers and tremendous in size. And they had this white breast, short wings, a black head, and long peaked bills. They stand fully 9 feet high. They looked at us with little surprise and presently waddled rather than walked toward the water and swam away in a northerly direction. The events that occurred during the following 100 or more days beggar description. We were on an open and iceless sea. The month that we reckoned to be November or December, and we knew that the so-called South Pole was turning toward the sun. Therefore, when passing out and away from the internal electrical light of the Smoky god and its genial warmth, we would be met by the light and the warmth of the sun, shining in through the southern opening of the earth, and we were not mistaken. There were times when our little craft, driven by wind, that was continuous and persistent, shot through the waters like an arrow. Indeed, had we encountered a hidden rock or an obstacle, our little vessel would have been crushed into kindling wood. At last, we were conscious that the atmosphere was growing decidedly colder, and a few days later, icebergs were sighted to the left. My father argued and corrected, and the winds which filled our sails from the warm climate within. The time of the year was certainly most auspicious for us to make our dash to the outside world, and attempted to scud our fishing sloop through open channels of the frozen zone which surrounds the polar regions. We were soon amid the ice packs, and how our little craft got through the narrow channels and escaped being crushed, I do not know. The compass behaved in the same drunken and unreliable fashion as in passing over the southern curve or the edge of the Earth's shell, as it had done in our inbound trip at the northern entrance. It gyrated, dipped, and seems like a thing that was possessed. One day, as I was lazily looking over the sloop's side into the clear waters, my father shouted, "Breakers ahead!" Looking up, I saw through a lifting mist a white object that towered several 100 feet high, completely shutting off our advance. We lowered our sail immediately, and none too soon. In a moment, we found ourselves wedged between two monstrous icebergs. Each was crowding in, and it was grinding against its fellow mountain of ice. They were like two gods of war contending for supremacy. We were greatly alarmed. Indeed, we were between the lines of a battle royale. The sonorous thunder of the grinding ice was like the continued volleys of artillery. Blocks of ice larger than houses were frequently lifted up 100 feet by the mighty force of the lateral pressure. They would shudder and rock to and fro seconds, then came crashing down with a deafening roar and disappearing from the foamy waters. Thus, for more than 2 hours, the contest of the icy giants continued. It seemed as if the end had come. The ice pressure was terrific, and while we were not caught in the dangerous part of the jam, and we were safe for a time being, Yet the heaving and the rendering of tons of ice fell splashing here and there into the water depths filled us with a shaking fear. Finally, to our great joy, the grinding of the ice ceased, and within a few hours the great mass slowly divided. And as if in act of providence had been performed, right before us lay an open channel. Should we venture with our little craft into this opening? If the pressure came on again, our little sloop would, as well as ourselves, be crushed into nothingness. We decided to take the chance, and accordingly hoisted our sail to the favoring breeze, and soon started out like a racehorse, running the gauntlet of this unknown narrow channel of open waters. All right, that's the end of part 4. Thank you, Nora, who says Jay deserves a lot of papers for hosting this for us. He can't join the party. Yes, it's a good time. All right, now we're going to do part 5. Part 5 is, I believe, when he gets rescued. Let's check it out. For the next 45 days, our time was employed in dodging icebergs and hunting channels. Indeed, we had not been favored with a strong south wind and a small boat. I doubt if this story ever could have been given to the world. At last, there came a morning when my father says, "My son, I think that we are to see home. We are almost through the ice. See, the open water lies before us." However, there were a few icebergs that had floated far northward into the open water still lay ahead of us on either side, stretching away for many miles. Directly in front of us, by the compass, which has now righted itself, due north there was the open sea. "What a wonderful story we have to tell the people of Stockholm," continued my father, while a look of pardonable elation lighted up his honest face. "And think of the gold nuggets stowed away on the hold." I spoke kind words to praise my father, not alone for his fortitude and endurance, but also for his courageous daring as a discoverer, and for having made the voyage that now promised such a successful end. And I was grateful too, that he had gathered the wealth of the gold that we were carrying home. While congratulating ourselves on the goodly supply of provisions and water that we had on hand, and on the dangers that we had escaped, we were startled by hearing a most terrific explosion, caused by the tearing apart of a huge mountain of ice. It was a deafening roar like the firing of 1,000 cannon. We were sailing at the time with a great speed and happened to be near a monstrous iceberg, which to all appearances was immovable as a rock-bound island. It seemed, however, that the iceberg had split and was breaking apart, whereupon the balance of the monster along which we were sailing was destroyed, and it began dipping from us. My father quickly anticipated the danger before I realized the awful possibilities. The iceberg extended down into the water many hundreds of feet, and as it tipped over, the portion coming up out of the water caught our fishing craft like a lever on a fulcrum, and it threw it into the air as if it had been a football. Our boat fell back on the iceberg, that by this time had changed the side next to us to the top. My father was still on the boat, having become entangled in the rigging, while I was thrown some 20 feet away. I quickly scrambled to my feet and shouted to my father, who answered, "All is well." Just then, a realization dawned upon me, and horror. The blood in my veins froze. The iceberg was still in motion. and its great weight and force in toppling over would cause it to submerge temporarily. I fully realized what a sucking maelstrom it would produce amidst the worlds of the water on every side. They would rush into the depression in all of their fury, like white-fanged wolves eager to eat a human prey. In this supreme moment of mental anguish, I remember glancing at our boat, which was lying on its side, and wondering if it could possibly right itself, if my father could escape. Was this the end of our struggles and our adventure? Was this death? All of these questions flashed through my mind in the fraction of a second, and a moment later, I was engaged in a life and death struggle. The ponderous monolith of ice sank below the surface, and the frigid waters gurgled around me in frenzied anger. I was in a saucer with the waters pouring in on every side. A moment more, and I lost consciousness. When I partially recovered my senses, I roused from the swoon of a half-drowned man. I found myself wet and stiff and almost frozen, lying on the iceberg, but there was no sign of my father or of our little fishing sloop. The monster berg had recovered itself, and with its new balance lifted its head perhaps 50 feet above the waves. The top of the island of this ice was a plateau, perhaps an acre in descent. I loved my father well, and I was grief-stricken at the awfulness of his death. I railed at fate that I too had not been permitted to sleep with him in the depths of the ocean. And finally, I climbed to my feet and I looked about me, the purple-domed sky above, and the shoreless green ocean beneath, and only an occasional iceberg was discernible. My heart sank in hopeless despair. I cautiously picked my way across the iceberg toward the other side, hoping that our fishing craft had righted itself. Dared I think that it was possible that my father still lived? It was but a ray of hope that flamed up in my heart, but the anticipation warmed my blood and my veins and started rushing like some rare stimulant through every fiber of my being. I crept close to the precipitous side of the iceberg, and I peered far down, still hoping. And then I made a circle of the berg and scanned every foot of the way. And thus I kept going around and around. One part of my brain was certainly becoming maniacal, while the other part, I believe, and due to this day, was perfectly rational. I was conscious of having made this circuit a dozen times, and while one part of my intelligence knew in all reason that there was not a vestige of hope, yet some strange, fascinating aberration bewitched and compelled me still to beguile myself with expectation. The other part of my brain seemed to tell me that there was no possibility that my father was alive. Yet I quit making the circuit pilgrimage. If I paused for a single moment, it would have been acknowledged of defeat, and should I do this, I felt that I should go mad. And thus, hour after hour, I walked around and around, afraid to stop and rest, yet physically powerless to continue much longer. Horror of horrors, to be cast away in this wide expanse of water without food or drink, and only a treacherous iceberg for an abiding place. My heart sank within me, and all semblance of hope was fading into a black despair. And then the hand of the deliverer was extended, and the death-like stillness of a solitude rapidly becoming unbearable was suddenly broken by the firing of a single gun. I looked up, and in startled amazement when I saw, less than half a mile away, a whaling vessel bearing down towards me with her sail full set. Evidently, my continued activity on the iceberg had attracted their attention. On drawing near, they pulled out a boat and descended cautiously onto the water's edge, and I was rescued. And a little later, while on board of the whaling ship, I found it was a Scotch whaler. It was called the Arlington, and she had cleared from the Dundee in September and started immediately for the Antarctic in search of whales. The captain, Angus Macpherson, seemed kindly disposed, but in manners of discipline, as I soon learned, possessed of an iron will. When I attempted to tell him that I had come from inside of the earth, the captain and mate looked at each other and shook their heads and insisted on my being put inside of a strict surveillance of the ship's physician. I was very weak and want for food, and I had not slept for many hours. However, after a few days' rest, I got up one morning and I dressed myself without asking permission of the physician or anyone else, and I told them that I was as sane as anyone. The captain of the ship sent for me again and questioned me concerning where I had come from, and how I came to be alone on the iceberg in the far-off Antarctic Ocean. I replied that I had just come from the inside of the earth, and proceeded to tell him how my father and myself had gone by the way of Spitsbergen and had come out by the way of the South Pole country, whereupon I was put into irons. I afterward heard the captain tell the mate that I was as crazy as a March hare, and that I must remain in confinement until I was rational enough to give a truthful account of myself. Finally, after much pleading and many promises, I then and there decided to invent some story that would satisfy the captain, and to never again refer to my trip to the land of the Smoky God, at least until I was safe with being among my friends. Within a fortnight, I was permitted to go about and to take place as one of the seamen. A little later, the captain asked me for an explanation. And so I told him that my experience had been so horrible that I was fearful for my memory, and I begged him to permit me to leave the question unanswered until sometime in the future. I think that you are recovering considerably, he said, but you are not sane by any good deal. Permit me to do such work as you may assign, I replied, and if it does not compensate you sufficiently, I will pay you immediately after I reach Stockholm to the last penny. Thus the matter was rested. And on finally reaching Stockholm, as I have already related, I found that my good mother had gone to her reward more than a year before. I have also told how later in the treachery of the relative land, it landed me into a madhouse where I was remained there for 28 years, seemingly unending years, and still later, after my release, how I returned to the life of a fisherman, following it sedulously for 27 years, and how I came to America and finally to Los Angeles, California. But all of this can be of little interest to the reader. Indeed, it seems to me the climax of my wonderful travels and strange adventures was reached when the Scotch sailing vessel took me from the iceberg on the Antarctic Ocean. Part 6, the conclusion. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope you can understand me. All right. Conclusion. In concluding this history of my adventures, I wish to state that I firmly believe science is yet in its infancy concerning the cosmology of the earth. There is so much that is unaccounted for by the world's accepted knowledge of today, and will ever remain so until the land of the Smoky god is known and recognized by our geographers. It is the land from whence came the great logs of cedar that have been found by explorers in open waters far over the northern edge of the Earth's crust, and also the bodies of mammoths whose bones were found in the vast beds of the Siberian coast. Northern explorers have done much. Sir John Franklin, de Haven Grinnell, Sir John Murray, Kane, Melville, Hall, Nansen, Schwatka, Greeley, Peary, Ross, Gerlache, Bernacchi, Andre, Amsden, Amundsen, and others have been striving to storm the frozen citadel of the mystery. I believe that Andre and his two brave companions, Stridberg and Freknel, who sailed away on the balloon Orion from the northwest coast of Spitsbergen on that Sunday afternoon of July 11th, 1897, are now in the within world, and doubtless are being entertained, as my father and myself were entertained by the kind-hearted giant race inhabiting the inner Atlantic continent. Having, in my humble way, devoted years to these problems, I am well acquainted with the accepted definitions of gravity, as well as the cause of the magnetic needle and its attraction. And I am prepared to say that it is my firm belief that the magnetic needle is influenced solely by the electrical currents which completely envelop the earth like a garment, and that these electrical currents in an endless circuit pass out of the southern end of the Earth's cylindrical opening, diffusing and spreading themselves over the outside of the surface and rushing madly on their course towards the North Pole. And while these currents seemingly dash off into space at the Earth's curve or the edge, yet they drop again to the inside surface and continue their way southwards along the inside of the Earth's crust, turning the opening of the so-called South Pole. As to gravity, no one knows what it is because it has not been determined whether it is atmospheric pressure that causes the apple to fall, or whether 150 miles below the surface of the Earth, supposedly one halfway through the Earth's crust, there exists some powerful lodestone attraction that draws it. And therefore, whether the apple, when it leaves the limb of the tree, is drawn or impelled downward to the nearest point of resistance is unknown to the students of physics. Sir James Ross claimed to have discovered the magnetic pole about his 74 degrees latitude. This is wrong. The magnetic pole is exactly one half the distance through the Earth's crust. And thus, if the Earth's crust is 300 miles in thickness, which is the distance I estimate it to be, then the magnetic pole is undoubtedly 150 miles below the surface of the Earth. It matters not where the test is made. It is at this particular point, 150 miles below the surface, gravity ceases and becomes neutralized. And when we go beyond the point, toward the inside of the surface of the Earth, a reverse attraction geometrically increases in its power until the other 150 miles of distance is traversed, which would bring us out of the inside of the Earth. And thus, if a hole were bored down through the Earth's crust at London, Paris, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, a distance of 300 miles, it would connect the two surfaces. While the inertia and the momentum of a weight dropped from the outside surface would carry it far past the magnetic center, yet before reaching the inside surface of the Earth, it would gradually diminish in speed after passing the halfway point, finally pause, and immediately fall back towards the outside surface, and continue to thus oscillate like the swinging of a pendulum with the power removed until it would finally rest at the magnetic center, or at that particular exactly one half the distance between the outside surface and the inside surface of the Earth. The gyration of the Earth in its daily act of whirling around in the spiral rotation at a rate greater than 1,000 miles every hour, or about 17 miles per second, make of it a vast electro-generating body, a huge machine, a mighty prototype of the puny man-made dynamo, which at best is but a feeble imitation of nature's original. The valleys of this inner Atlantis continent, bordering the upper waters of the farthest north, are in season covered with the most magnificent, luxuriant flowers, not hundreds and thousands, but millions of acres, from which the pollen or the blossoms are carried away in almost every direction by the Earth's spiral gyrations and the agitation of the wind resulting therefrom, and it is these blossoms or pollen from the floral meadows within the Earth that produce the colored snows of the Arctic regions that have so mystified the northern explorers. Beyond this question, the new land that is within the home, the cradle of the human race, and viewed from the standpoint of the discoveries that are made by us, must of necessity have been most important, bearing on all the physical, paleontological, archaeological, philological, and mythological theories of antiquity. The same idea of going back to the land of mystery, to the very beginning, to the origin of man, is found in Egyptian traditions of the earlier traditional regions of the gods, the heroes, and men from the historical fragments of Manetho, fully verified by the historical records taken from the more recent excavations of Pompeii, as well as the traditions of the North American Indians. It is now 1 hour past midnight. The new year of 1908 is here, and this is the third day thereof. And having last finished the record of my strange travels and adventures, I wish given to the world, I am ready, and ever longing for the peaceful rest which I am sure will follow life's trials and vicissitudes. I am old in years, and ripe, both with adventures and with the sorrows, yet still rich with the few friends that I have cemented to me in my struggles to lead a just and upright life. Like a story that is well nigh told, my life is ebbing away. The The presentiment is strong with me that I shall not live to see the rising of another sun. And thus do I conclude my message. Olaf Jansen. That's the end of Olaf's story. Let's read part 7. This is the last part from the author. I found much difficulty in deciphering and editing the manuscripts of Olaf Jensen. However, I have taken the liberty to reconstructing only very few expressions, and in doing this have in no way changed the spirit or the meaning in what was said. Otherwise, the original text has neither been added to nor taken from. It is impossible for me to express my opinion as to the value or the reliability of the wonderful statements made by Olaf Jansen. The description here given of the strange lands and people visited by them, the location of the cities, the names and the directions of the rivers, the other information herein combined, conform in every way to the rough drawings given into my custody by this ancient Norseman, which drawings together with the manuscript, it is my intention at some later date to give to the Smithsonian Institution, to preserve for the benefit of those interested in the mysteries of the farthest north, the frozen circle of silence. It is certain there are many things in Vedic literature, in Josephus, the Odyssey, the Iliad, Terrien de Lecouper's early history of Chinese civilization, Flammarion's astronomical myths, Lenormand's beginnings of history, Hesiod's theogony, Sir John de Motteville's writings, and Sayce's recordings of the past, that, to say the least, are strangely in harmony with the seemingly incredible text in the yellow manuscript of the Old Norseman, Olaf Jansen, and now, for the first time, given to the world. The end. All right. I hope you all enjoyed that. I need to get some water. Let's do this. Let's take a break. I want to come back and say hello to everybody. I haven't been in the chat. All right, we'll be right back.
Around the world men's thoughts will fly, quick as the twinkling of an eye, and waters shall great wonders do. How strange, and yet it shall come true. Beneath the water men shall walk, shall ride, shall sleep, shall even talk, and in the air men shall be seen in white and black and even green. For in those wondrous far-off days the women shall adopt a craze to dress like men in trousers wear, and to cut off their locks of hair. They'll ride astride with brazen brow as witches do. On broomsticks now there'll be a sign for all to see. Be sure that it will certain be. Then love shall die and marriage cease, and nations wane and babes decrease, as wives shall fondle cats and dogs, and men live much the same as hogs. Pictures alive with movements free, boats like fishes beneath the sea. When men like birds shall scour the sky, then half the world deep drenched in blood shall die. Then half the world deep drenched in blood shall die. For those who live this century through, in fear and trembling this shall do. Flee to the mountains and the dens, to bog and forest and wild fens. For storm will rage and oceans roar, when Gabriel stands on sea and shore. And as he blows his wondrous horn, old worlds die and new be born. Fiery dragon will cross the sky 6 times before this earth shall die. Mankind will tremble and frightened be, for the 6 heralds in this prophecy. For 7 days and 7 nights, man will watch this awesome sight. The tides will rise beyond their ken to bite away the shores, and then the mountains will begin to roar, and earthquakes split the plain to shore, and flooding waters rushing in will flood the lands with such a din that mankind cowers in muddy fen and snarls about his fellow men. And when the dragon's tail is gone, man forgets and smiles and carries on to apply himself. Too late, for mankind has earned deserved fate. His masked smile, his false grandeur will serve the gods their anger stir, and they will send the dragon back to light the sky. His tail will crack upon the earth and rend the earth, and man shall flee king, lord, and serf. And men will die of thirst before the oceans rise to mount the shore, and lands will crack and rend anew. You think it's strange, it will come true. And in some far off distant land, some men, oh such a tiny band, will have to leave their solid mount and span the earth, those few to count. And those surviving this will then begin the human race again. But not on land already there, but on ocean beds stark, dry, and bare. Not every soul on earth will die as the dragon's tail goes sweeping by. Not every land on earth will sink, but these will wallow in stench and stink of rotting bodies of beast and man, of vegetation crisped on land. And those that live will ever fear the dragon's tail for many years. But time erases memory. You think it's strange, but it will be. And before the race is built anew, a silver serpent comes to view, and spew out men of like unknown to mingle with the earth now grown cold from its heat. And these men can enlighten the minds of future man to intermingle and show them how to live and love, and thus endow the children with the second sight, a natural thing, so that they might grow graceful, humble, and when they do, the golden age will start anew.
Okay. Let's get back to the live stream. Aloha! What's up, everyone? I'm back. Hey, that was the first time I ever tried something like that. I was not totally planning on doing an accent or mini accents, apparently. I just wanted to, so whatever. Yes. So I hope that most of that was understandable as I was trying to get into my own character. What's up, everyone? Hey, listen, I just want to say thank you first and foremost. I'm totally in the chat now. Actually, let me move my screen so everything's where it should be. Hold on. Thank you, many of you. The main reason I wanted to do this reading was because I've been wanting to share this book, which to me is as much fact as any book of academics that I've come across. But also I kind of had mentioned, I've never asked for a donation ever. But I kind of, when I posted this in the community section, I'm like, hey, I'm kind of doing this, if I can get a donation, that'd be awesome. And don't feel bad if you didn't donate or if you can't or whatever, it's totally fine. But I want to thank everyone who did. I'm going through a lot with my custody and legal stuff over my son. My son has been taken away again. By his mother, who just won't return him for the dumbest reasons. But anyway, I miss my son. I'm trying to remain focused. I'm trying not to be, depressed or heartbroken or anything like that. I tend to wear my emotions on my sleeves, in case you haven't noticed. And thanks. Yeah, thanks. Hold on, let me get the chat pulled up here. I'm rambling anyway. Thank you is really what I'm saying. I'm just saying thank you. I super appreciate all the support, especially during this time. I'm moving this weekend, so there's a lot of crazy bills to pay and all kinds of stuff, and I super appreciate all of you. Okay, hold on. What was I doing? All right, I'm gonna try to get the chat pulled up so we can read comments. There we go. Good. There we go. Amaroli B says hi. Hey, what's up? Oh, I just got a donation from Chia Corinne, number 3. Thank you. I like the little sticker too. You guys are all very sweet. So thank you. I'm not trying to make this live stream. I hate talking about money. Makes me uncomfortable. So I'm just going to leave it humbly at thank you. Thank all of you who have helped out. People who have joined my website. There's been a lot of people joining the website lately, which I'm super impressed. It's a sweet website. You should definitely check it out. I just finished a whole section on the North Pole last night, which is what gave me the idea to do this reading. And on my website, if you remember, you can go to the North Pole section and you can actually click on a link that allows you to flip through this book that we just read. It's actually right there on the website. You just flip right through it and read it like a book. As well as Vril and some other writings as well. Yeah, isn't it? Right, Bill? Bill says the Smoky God book is amazing. How is this book not? You know what? I already know the answer, so I'm not going to ask the question. But it blows my mind. You know what I mean? That they teach such dumb and irrelevant things like George Washington had wooden teeth in academics, in our schools, to our children. But they won't share this type of information, which is based in reality. Seeking Yeshua. Aw, thank you. I super appreciate it. I'm trying not to have any broken hearts at all. I'm trying really hard to stay focused, to stay determined, kicking out work on the website, making sure that I touch base with people in the comments and in the chats. And I have a chat on my website and I try to stay up on, people's conversations there. There's also a place where people can post stuff on my website. So I'm trying to be more actively involved in like checking out all the posts and making comments and stuff. I'm sure I'll get my son back. And regardless, I'm going to continue to trudge on and to do and to live as best as I can for myself and for him. So thank you. I super appreciate all of your support. I don't like to share too much of my like personal drama. Like I feel like a crybaby. You know what I mean? I also don't want to confuse new people who are new to my channel and they're like, what is this about? Does this guy always talk like this? You know what I mean? So I try to just stay on topic, go with the flow, but I also want to still appear personable and I still want to be myself, basically, no matter who I'm talking to. Hey, thank you. I super appreciate it. A horse eyeball. I believe that's a horse. Let's see. We also got, Luke Key says the website's great. Rainy Lee says sending good vibes your way. It's totally okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Gary says flat love. Right on. Nora says, I respect that you ask for support when you need it and you deserve it too. We're here because of you. Thank you. Thank you. That's all I'll say about that. I'm one of those people that freaks out and that doesn't want to talk about like if I need help. Like I don't tend to ask for help. You know what I mean? I just swim until I drown, essentially. Or until somebody helps me. Or until I reach the shore or whatever it is. So yeah. Don't want to talk about any of that stuff. It'll work out. Everything's gonna work out for me and for my son. For my family. This is going to be good for you guys too, because in this new place that I'm in, I feel like I'm going to have the privacy that I need, and the atmosphere to be able to do this more often, like all the time, which I'm excited about. Ghost User says, JayDreamerZ, well, you have to ask whether or not it's good timing or not. The Germans in World War II were the symbol of the black sun, and that is what the Smoky god of the underworld of the inner earth. And that is the Smoky god of the underworld of the inner earth. Could be. Very well could be. Could also not be. Possibly. I hear what you're saying, and I like your ideas. Sound Vibes says, JayDreamerZ, you're doing awesome. Loving vibes too. Thank you. Thank you. Louis Martinez. Family court. For what it is, it's just a heartache. I know. I'm sorry. Like, see, this is the problem. Whenever I bring up, this is one of my problems. Whenever I bring up these things that break my heart, then everyone in the chat responds to it and I get comments and then it just reminds me of it all over again. So this is mostly why I don't share a lot of my personal stuff with you guys, because I get it back. And it's a struggle I'm going through. I don't want to be brokenhearted. I don't want to be sad, and I don't want to live in despair. I want to trudge on. Shelly Texley says, "Hey fam, I feel like I'm too loud. I'm not too loud, am I? Hey fam and Jay, please check out our true status of what we are and what the truth of how they take us from this is how we become kings and become the creditors, not the debtors who will always lose." I agree. This whole entire surface world is debtors, basically. Ghost User says, JayDreamerZ, so is the Black Sun swastika people who they appear? What? So is the Black Sun swastika people who they appear? Or are they actually the rulers of the underworld? I don't know what people you're talking about. It's hard for me to answer that question because you're in the chat and you're probably on a phone trying to type out as best as you can. It's difficult to read what you're saying, and it's also for me to take sides. It's also difficult for me to take sides. I don't like to take sides. I don't care if you're a God person or a Satan person. Like, don't ask me to take sides in your little fights or beliefs or anything, because I won't. I almost never will, right? The only thing I recognize is selfless and selfish, goodness and evil, or whatever. Like, I hate getting political and saying like, oh, well, you know, Democrats are this and Republicans are this and Nazis are this, and you know, all those names and labels. I can't stand it. I hate it. I believe everyone has good reasons for the things that they do, at least in their own minds, and they should be fully convinced in their own minds of the things that they do. So are they who they appear to be? I don't know. It depends on who they appear to be to you. You know what I mean? Because I don't have the same perspective as the rest of the world. Thanks, Gary. Super appreciate it. Binary Codes says, JayDreamerZ, insiders say giants still control the world stage behind the scenes, and that we're being used to mine rare earth minerals. What is your take on this? I've heard of the stories that we were, you know, basically used as slave labor to mine gold and other precious metals and whatnot. I tend to believe that. I could care less about gold, silver, precious metals, diamonds. If I had a whole bag of them, I wouldn't do anything with them except for probably sell them so I can get fake paper money so that I can, you know, not have such a difficult life and struggles and stuff. But whatever. That's just me. Lou Key says, Jay, dude, we are going to have an epic adventure someday. Hope we get others for real interested too. Are we? Okay. Well, time will tell, I suppose. Rebecca Stollard says, we ought to all make a chain. Jay, as a stepmom, I shared my beautiful children and just share everything. Okay, right on. I think it's because I've just been reading for like 2 straight hours. It's hard for me to read people's comments for some reason. Ghost User says, JayDreamerZ, look up the Black Sun symbolism. No, I don't, bro. Ugh. I've already looked up the Black Sun symbolism. That's another name of the swastika. Yes, I know. I understand. I get it. Thank you. I'm not trying to be rude or anything. It's just that, no, I shouldn't do that. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be rude, period. I hope that the people watching take into consideration that I have studies well beyond that which you think that I have. So quite often people are telling me like, you need to study this. You need to look into this. You need to read the Bible. You need to, you know what I mean? And it doesn't sit well with me when people tell me what to do, especially when I have already done it years ago. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to pick on you or anything. I'm just saying, hopefully I can use these types of comments as a foundation for future comments when people are like, you know, you need to study the New Testament, or you need to study the Quran, or whatever. You know what I mean? I don't like to be told I need to do anything, but that's just me. I feel like maybe I'm cranky all of a sudden. I don't know. Maybe I'm not. Let's find out. JayDreamerZ, best to be impartial and listen. I agree. Ghost User says, JayDreamerZ, bro, the Smoky god is a sun under the earth, ? Why are you being so aggressive about simple logic? Oh, okay. Well, check this out. Bye-bye. Yeah, I'm not arguing on my own channel. F that. Sharon Albo says, take a deep cleaning breath, Jay. You're so right. Every little thing's going to be all right. Whew, thank you. I super need to, actually. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I just read for a long time. Maybe it's hot in here. Maybe there's a vibe that I'm picking up on or feeling or something, but something's off. Yeah, I'm totally going to stay cool. I feel like there's too many people in this world that want to argue. They want to debate. They want to accuse, and they want to establish boundaries. Like, they don't know where I stand, so they need to ask me where I stand so that they can figure out how to deal with me. But I don't stand anywhere. I'm constantly moving. So I hope to put that out there as much as I can, because I hate getting tricked. I don't want to get tricked into debates or arguing. And I definitely don't like it when people are like, oh, so now you're defensive? Oh, you know what I mean? Like, don't do that. This is not the place for that. You know what I mean? Go to some other channel and argue with them. I don't do arguing and stuff. Nor do I do believing in whatever other people believe in. I believe in this. What do you think about that? I don't think anything about it. Well, you need to look at it. You need to research it. You need to be into it. No, I don't. That's the simplicity of it. I have my interests, and all of you have your interests. Hopefully we meet here and find some common ground in all of those. Gary says it's poetic. Thank you. I also like it. Nora says, Jay, that's right. You might feel that energy from the comments. Possibly. I'm definitely picking up on some weird, strange friction energy. Rebecca says, let's get a boat and cruise down there. So moo, the ox, and poo about pole. Yep. That's enough for me. That's enough for me. All right. Well, anyways, it was nice to see you all in the chat. Thank you for joining me. I super appreciate it. Sorry about my energy. Like I said, I tend to just, whatever the energy is, I pick up on it, and it resonates with me. I pick up on other energies quite easily and quite quickly. But anyways, that being the case, I had a great time loving reading this book to you guys. I loved it. I was nervous, as I have been. Super nervous to read in front of everyone. But I hope you got something out of it. If you never read this book before, hopefully this was able to help you out or whatnot. I highly encourage getting a copy yourself or checking it out on my website and just reading it for yourself. It's a great read. And it's convincing, just like the author says. NWDAS says, JayDreamerZ. Kina Art says, I'm a longtime listener. You're amazing, wise, and I love listening to your good vibes. Oh, well, thank you, Kina Art. I super appreciate it. Anyways, you guys had a great time. I had a great time. I'm just rambling now. So I'm stoked. Hopefully you guys check out the website and let me know what you think. I'm super proud of it. And I'm going to wrap things up, and I'll see everybody here soon. Wish me luck this weekend. I'm doing a pretty big move, leaving my home that I've been in for like 6 years and going to a new place. So I'm nervous. I hope it all works out. I hope I can still keep doing YouTube and stuff and, make enough money to just live at least month to month and get by with my son and myself. That's my hope. My hope is that we take it to another level. All right. Well, anyways, until next time, I'm JayDreamerZ saying good vibes and goodbye.
I'll try so hard to fade away.